really, we are looking at future-proof again. Last week we looked at that, and did I say that I went to a restaurant and with two lawyer friends of mine just before I moved to Sydney, probably at the start of last year before I moved to New Zealand, and they took me out for lunch, and I gave them a copy of the book, and the waitress came up and she said, "That looks like a cosmic roller coaster on the front." And I thought, yeah, it is actually. That's probably true, because it feels like the roller coaster ride of where we're going culturally at the moment. And what does that challenge present to people who aren't Christian, who think that maybe that's all there is? It's a nihilistic world of fatalism and chance. But what does it mean for Christians to live in that setting as well? And we looked at the idea of what would happen if someone came back from the future to say, you've got to be ready for the future coming. What does it look like? What does it feel like to be in 2055, for example? But my contention is that it doesn't feel like you can go in 10-year blocks anymore. It feels much smaller slices of time, and the roller coaster isn't giving you a lot of lead time as to where it's going to turn next. Would that be true? I think that. And I have two words of the year. One is running. No, that's not true. Transcendence, because I think we're in a place where people are looking for something more. And we'll look at that. And the other one is vibe. Have you noticed the word vibe? If you're an older Australian such as myself, you'll remember from the castle, it's the vibe, Your Honour. But the word vibe is the new vibe. Something shifted in Western culture, and you can see how it was all going in one direction, and suddenly it feels like it's all going in another direction. And you wonder, well, when will the vibe shift again? If it happened that quickly, what will happen again? We live in discombobulating times. And Niall Ferguson, who is a very smart man, and is married to Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who I spoke of last week as well, the former Muslim lady who became an atheist, then became a Christian. Mind you, what is Donald Trump doing with his face? And the colour is terrible in that. The vibe shift goes global. Now, Niall Ferguson is a historian and he's a conservative thinker, and he hates the word vibe, but he said there's no other way to describe what's going on in the Western setting at the moment than the vibe shift. And you see it, because what happens in vibe shifts in the Western world is we don't put up everyone against the wall and shoot them, though some people probably like to do that. We put ideas up against the wall and shoot them. We shoot them down. We put philosophies up against the wall, ideologies, and suddenly the ideologies are going in a different direction than they were for the last 4 years or 10 years or whatever. And that's the vibe shift we're in at the moment. And what I want to explore today is how do Christians navigate that? How do you keep away from defeatism or triumphalism, depending on your political allegiances? How do you maintain gospel unity and gospel focus and keep those things a little bit lower in what you're thinking? And this is what he said. The vibe shift has gone from the world of the fashionistas, that'd be me, right? Thanks for the golf comment there. To the world of 4-star admirals. Anyone? By way of the tech bros and the Trump-Musk campaign. The powerful people have shifted in the vibe. That's what he's kind of saying. The cultural moment has changed, and it will change the political moment. It will change the geopolitical moment. It feels astonishing that can change the whole geopolitics. But you already noticed that it's given permission, the vote in the US, for Europe to rethink all of its policies and things as well. We're in a really big vibe shift, and we've got an election in 3 or 4 months' time. Wow. Who would have thought that? Will there be a vibe shift in Australia? What will it feel like? What will it look like? Australia, you feel, was going in one direction. Oh, that's the Harry Styles reference there. But in 2017, we had the plebiscite, and the vote in the plebiscite was 62-38 for same-sex marriage. And then we have the vote on the voice, and it was 38-62, the other way to what the vibe shift would have said. We're a progressive nation, we're going in this direction, boom, we go in this direction. And Christians have to navigate that. And the reason we have to navigate that is because there are Christians who hold different perspectives on those things. How do you maintain gospel unity, if it is gospel unity, in the mix of that? How do you show the world? And if you're not a Christian here today, you might want to watch how Christians respond to difference. How do we deal with differences when vibes shift? Do we get triumphalistic when it's our vibe and despairing when it's not? Al Mohler, who's very conservative, Southern Baptist, sort of suited up guy, I interviewed him on a podcast a few weeks ago, and he said the thing about it being a Christian is you can't be too happy or too unhappy about an election result. You can't be too happy or too unhappy because Jesus is king. And that's, as we navigate the vibe shifts, what we'll look at. But the vibe shift has changed when you think about the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse. Here they are. I don't know if you know these guys. Does anyone know any of them? You know some of them. Just 15 years ago, I'm against religion because it teaches us to be satisfied with not understanding the world, said Richard Dawkins. And then Sam Harris, religious moderation is the product of secular knowledge and scriptural ignorance. So he's saying most religions are violent and they want to, put you down. Daniel Dennett, who has passed away in the last year or so, the only meaning of life worth caring about is the one that can understand our best efforts to examine it. You see the whole scientific shift. And then the late and great Christopher Hitchens, that which can be asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence, which put Christianity in a bad spot because they're saying everything you believe is by faith, so they wouldn't take anything from the Bible as being evidential about anything, so we can dismiss it a priori. And I felt like we were, we looked lame when we were discussing that. And the vibe shift back then, this is literally the ad campaign on the London buses. There's probably no God. Now stop worrying and enjoy your life. I don't know if that has worked out that well in the last 15 years for people because we live in an age of anxiety. Imagine getting hit by that bus too. But, the irony. But what does Richard Dawkins say now? I'm a cultural Christian. What does he mean by that? Well, he still thinks Christianity's stupid because when A.N. Hersey Ali became a Christian, he said, I realise you are a Christian and I think Christianity's nonsense. But he's saying, of all the things I prefer to not believe in a nice way, Christianity's it's the thing that shaped my life. He's admitting that the religion he doesn't believe in is primarily Christianity. Does that make sense? Like, he's not thinking, well, I'm not into that or that. He's going, I'm rejecting and I'm setting up Christianity as the bad guy at some level. But I recognise that it has shaped me. But the problem is, when you read those science comments, Christianity shaped science. It gave it its oomph. And they've been feeding off the fruit of it and denying the root of it. Those days are over, baby. I should just let them go, but hey, anyway, there's a song in that. I'm a cultural Christian. It's a big statement. Sam Harris, Waking Up, a guide to spirituality without religion. That's really interesting. Even Sam Harris recognised there's something that we need beyond ourselves, something transcendent, so to speak. And it feels like it's called Waking Up, which, he doesn't like the word woke, but he uses the word waking up, a guide to spirituality without religion. You think, really, if you'd told the 15 years ago Sam Harris that he was going to write a book like that, he might have laughed at you. It's kind of like, can we have it without it? Can I have cultural Christianity? Can I have spirituality without religion? And kind of the world vibe has shifted on that a little bit, saying, no, you can't. But these things happen quickly. So Brendan O'Neill, who writes, the editor of Spiked, a year and a half ago, 21st of the 6th of 2023, is on a podcast called A Heretic's manifesto. Because all of his ideas, which were all of the conservative ideas, were seen as the heretical ideas of the culture. Doesn't feel like that's where we are now, a year and a half later. It feels like things have shifted to the point where he said recently, I'm so irritated by the expression vibe shift. This is so much more than that. I love the word vibe, so we're going to say it a bit tonight, right? But the vibe shift. And it isn't just in thinkers, it's in our biggest corporations as well. And no, the thing I'm going to say at this point is Christianity could look at that and the vibe shift and go, okay, the vibe shift isn't Christian per se, but it gives us a nice umbrella to park ourselves under. Let's keep going with that vibe shift. And I think we've got to be very careful how we map out Christianity in the current vibe shift. We should not attach ourselves too quickly to something that seems, oh, this is where it's going now. Because someone might pull the rug out from under our feet, or it might take us in a direction that we don't particularly want to go when we turn around and look at it. And we're seeing that in Christianity at the moment. There's a bit of a civil war in it at the moment. A very hard right at the moment as well, coming up. But I thought the vibe shift was most seen in two photos I'm going to show you of the tech bro. You see, this is him in 2015. And you know what? I reckon I could have taken him. I look at that and go, look at you, pasty face man. Oh, you know. He looks like the typical tech nerd there, doesn't he? But you know what? He's been working out. He's been running, well, he still can't run a 5K as fast as I can by 3 minutes. And I'm 15, 20 years older than him, I don't think I could take him now. Whew. Looks like he's about to, you know. Something's changed. Even the appearance, it feels like the tech bros were this way and now there's a vibe shift going on. So Facebook has decided that Meta has decided how it's going to roll out information is going to change. It's all open slather. Can you see the issue that's coming down the line with AI in the process at the moment too? Stephen Driscoll's book, Made in Our Image, talking about AI. And he's a Christian, lives in Canberra, I think. It's a great book on where's the future of AI and how do Christians respond to that God made us in his image and now we are creating a system that reproduces itself and grows beyond our expectation. That is already thinking intuitively about things in ways that we would not have picked. And what does that mean? What does that mean for Christianity? What does it mean for information? What does it mean about truth-telling? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? So much of our hope for the future for many people is in what we call techno-religion. If we could just be uploaded to some mainframe, we would live forever. Disembodied, of course. But this body lets us down. It isn't fixing itself. And if we were uploaded to that mainframe, whatever it is, we would loose ourselves from the surly bonds of racism, sexism, ableism, all those sorts of things. Feels like there's an eschatological end-time hope that technology is offering us. We can let you live forever. No body, but we can let you live forever. And even in the world of Christian apologetics, things have muscled up a little bit. This is William Lane Craig. Does anyone, well, you won't see him there. William Lane Craig. Does anyone know William Lane Craig? I reckon I could take him as well. We're not going there. But I don't think I could take Wes Huff. Did anyone watch Wes Huff on Joe Rogan? Look at those arms, man. Where's his arms, right? 5.4 million people to today have watched Wes Huff explain the documents of the Bible, the resurrection, and what's Joe Rogan's primary word in that whole video? Wow. Wow. Now, that's okay. It's a good long-form conversation. The thing is, though, we go, well, you know, we're back. Christianity's back. Woohoo! 5.2. Well, let's face it. Zuckerberg was on the next week, and that's well surpassed 5 million. Right? Context, context, context. And the Donald Trump one was 49 million before the election. And what did Kamala Harris said to Joe Rogan when he offered? 45 minutes, you come to me, and I've got the questions. And he goes, it doesn't work that way. The world has changed. You need me more than I need you. You see the power shift? You see how technology and information are, who owns it? DeepSeek, anyone? These are the issues that we're facing as Christians. How do we speak the truth? How do we ensure that we are hearing the truth and speaking the truth in love to other people? And what I've experienced is lots of people end up on church who've watched, in fact, not lots of people. My friend today in Perth phoned me today. He's not a Christian. He wants to go to church. His wife would be against it, and he's been reading the Bible. He said, I've just finished the New Testament in 90 days. Well, that's great. Started in the Old Testament. He said, I've just finished Revelation. I went, that's not so great. How's that going? And he said, I just watched some YouTube videos. That's not great at all. Yeah. But he's saying, what do I have to believe here? So my friend who's not a Christian has been reading the New Testament for 90 days and gone down the rabbit hole of everything on YouTube with no framework. And then he phones me and says, what should I think here? So I'm busy sending stuff, Bible Project, where's half? And what we're going to find, and maybe it's you, that you just go down the rabbit hole and say, well, what's true, what's not? We've got to be very clear about what we believe, what is true. But also when people come to us with wacko ideas, not to go, oh my goodness. That's just the world at the moment. Just the way things are. But I think it's an exciting time. Someone I think you really should listen to is Justin Brearley. Does anyone listen to his podcast, The Surprising Rebirth of Belief in God, or read the book? And he talks about the tide of faith, the sea of faith coming back in. And it's a great image, and I'll explain where he gets it from in a minute. Now, I was in Tasmania at, is it Turner's Beach? I think it was. That's how far the tide goes out. Well, it's gone out quite a while. It was coming in at that point. And I go for a long walk along the beach, and the sand's hard because the tide's gone way out, and you can almost follow it out before it starts to come back in. And it just leaves this long strand of washed of everything smooth. And Justin Brearley is saying the tide of faith has gone out for so long, and the sand is just, everything's been washed clean, that people have no framework to believe in. And people like Richard Dawkins would say, well, science will make sure that the tide of faith keeps going out and the tide of rationalism will keep coming in. But tides turn, don't they? And I think we're in the moment of a bit of a tide turn. More on that later. Because this is the beach the next morning, the same beach. Isn't that interesting? It's a huge tidal shift. No sand at all. You can't see it, it's up to the rocks. And Justin Brearley takes his view, or his statement about the sea of faith, from a famous poem by 19th century poet Matthew Arnold, who wrote this in a poem called Dover Beach. Where is it? Keep doing that. The third stanza says this. He's writing about being down on the beach and seeing the tide go out, but he's drawing other analogies. And this is a 19th century. The modern world is about to rise. Science is about to take over. Already religion is draining away. And he says, the sea of faith was once too at the full, and round earth's shore lay like the folds of a bright girdle furled. But now I only hear its melancholy, long withdrawing roar, retreating to the breath of the night wind, down the vast edges drear and naked shingles of the world. Who did an arts degree here? I love this. Who's an engineer? I'll explain to you later. But the line that's in that has been almost baked into the Western understanding of where we're going with religion is the long, melancholy, withdrawing roar of faith. And we talked about it, that in 2016, 900,000 people in Australia ticked no religion. Extra people. That's on top of who was generally ticking it. And in 2021, another 900,000 people on the census ticked no religion. And we're just expecting in 2026 in the next census that are we? Do you think that will happen? Have we set the agenda that that's what God can't do anything with this? It's just too hard. We're just too modern. And that's part of our problem as Christians. We go, oh, that person, I'll say no for them. You ever done that? I've got to say no for that person. They don't want to hear about Jesus, Don't say no for people because people are hungry again. My friend phones me up to talk, and we've, spent a lot of time talking about a lot of things, and he suddenly read the New Testament in 90 days. And now he's starting the Old Testament. He said, where should I begin? I said, Leviticus. No, I didn't. Don't boil, a young goat in its mother's milk. That's the key verse. I said, yeah. The long, melancholy, withdrawing roar. And for the likes of Dennett and Harris and, Dawkins and Hitchens, they loved that melancholy, withdrawing roar because they just filled it gleefully, that space. Problem is, of course, people are worrying. It's not as if there's probably no God, so they stop worrying and get on with your life. It doesn't feel like that kind of world, does it? It doesn't feel like that at all. There's the opposite of that. That's why we have 4 years this way and 4 years this way, and Sir Keir Starmer becomes the Prime Minister of the UK with huge approval ratings, only to be falling into the gutter with his approval ratings 6 months later. We don't know what we want. We don't know what can solve it. So we'll throw ourselves at anything to see if it will do it. And Matthew Arnold's poem, written as a romantic poet in the cusp of the modern world, seems to sum it up, the long melancholy roar of this draining away tide of faith. But he was no fool. This is his next stanza. Our love, let us be true to one another. For the world which seems to lie before us like a land of dreams, so various, so beautiful, so new, hath really neither joy, nor love, nor light, nor certitude, nor peace, nor help for pain. And we are here, as on a darkling plain, swept with confused alarms of struggle and flight, where ignorant armies clash by night. That's sobering, isn't it? Do you know what he saw? He saw that without faith, joy, love, light, certitude, peace, help for pain, were just a mirage. It looks exciting when the water goes out and there's this glistening strand with the moonlight on it. It looks like a land of dreams. But it hasn't turned out that way in the modern West. It was so various, so beautiful, and so new. And the other thing that strikes me is that our love, let us be true to one another. We don't even have to do that in our modern culture. Who is the person you are to be true to? Yourself. Because that's the only stable place, and even that's not stable, that you can land on if those other things no longer exist. We live in a world in which your main aim is there's some sort of internal true you, which you kind of got to prise open from all of the things of this world and all of the cultures and the sociologies and the religions. And inside that, there's you. And if your covenant marriage relationship is stopping you from being authentic, then it's more noble to get rid of that than to remain. And if you haven't got time, as Jesus said, we haven't got time for those negative people in your life. Get rid of them, You see how silly that sounds? And then who becomes the arbiter of what's negative? There's only one source, you. That's kind of the world we're living in at the moment. So is the tide coming back in? Be exciting, wouldn't it? Be exciting if you could just keep doing exactly what you're doing now and it would all sort out. But let me suggest a little something else. There's a difference between a tide and a tsunami. These are sobering pictures from the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004, where people thought a tide was coming back in. And it wasn't. It was a tsunami. And it's not the water specifically that is the most dangerous by the time it hits the shore. It's the tree, the car, the house. You can be as strong a swimmer as you want. But when you're taken out by the flotsam and jetsam of a tsunami, you're dead. And 225,000 people were killed in the Boxing Day tsunami in 2004. Much of it by the flotsam and jetsam. And it seems to me that what we're experiencing isn't this orderly return of the sea of faith. It's a tsunami of spirituality. A bit of this, a little bit of that, contradictory ideas modelled together to try and put together. And people will come upon our shores with all sorts of brokenness, all sorts of things that you wouldn't have expected if you'd been doing church in the 1950s. Or you've been doing church thinking that the Western world is the only way people do spirituality, for example. The great philosopher, poet Kaiser Soze, in The Usual Suspects, said the devil's greatest trick was to get you to not believe in him, or to convince you that he didn't exist. Only in the West, not in other places of the world. And we're going to see a tsunami of spiritual flotsam and jetsam where people are broken by stuff, don't understand stuff, and they need somewhere to land that gives them some place to sort out the jumble and hear the good news about Jesus. And hear the gospel that does give meaning and certitude and love, where you don't come to the conclusion that the point of my life is to be true to myself, but the point of my life is to die to myself. They're very different ways of looking at the world. I suspect in the next 20 to 30 years, the flotsam and jetsam will land on our shores in church, and we might have to pick our way through the debris for people to help them put together a life that seems far more challenging and bracing to us than what we've experienced in the past. Big issues in their lives will have taken their lives over, and they can't undo some of it. And if we're the kind of churches that are, look the part, play the part, make sure you're sort of fairly middle class and you know the rules of engagement in modern life, that may not actually help them. They may feel disenfranchised by that. The sobering thing about the tsunami, there's a tsunami bulletin the day of the tsunami. This message is for information only. There is no tsunami warning or watch in effect. It's okay, people. Just keep doing what you're doing. It's all going to be okay. Here's the line. This earthquake is located outside the Pacific. No destructive tsunami threat exists based on historical earthquake and tsunami data. 225,000 people later. In one sense, we have to be ready for whatever is coming and say, it won't be the same as the past. Things are going to change. Things will get complex. I don't know if we looked at this last week, Tara Isabella Burton, or as I called her, Wednesday Adams, as I call her. And she writes a book, in her book, Strange Rites, New Religions for a Godless Age, she nails this issue. She calls the people who are the flotsam and jetsam tsunami people the remixed. The remixed hunger for the same things human beings have always longed for. A sense of meaning in the world and personal purpose within that meaning, a community to share that experience with, and rituals to bring the power of that experience into achievable everyday life, but they're doing it differently. Meaning, purpose, community, and rituals. And we have to be able to explain the gospel in those, that fourfold framework. They're looking for meaning, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for a place to express it. And here's the interesting thing is that people are going to come along our path, and you might be here, who just aren't as tidy as life used to be. And they're going to suck up more of your time. And that's the way it's going to be. And rituals to bring the power of that experience into achievable everyday life. See, the vibe has shifted, and people are looking for something, and the gospel provides those things in gospel community. Are we ready for that? What do you need to do as a church to make sure that you're doing that fourfold thing? It's worth having a conversation with each other and with your leadership about that in the future. Another quote. The surprising rebirth at Oxford, perspectives from a graduate student. Oxford University was founded, from a religious framework, but it's one of the most irreligious places to go to. It was. But this woman, Carolyn Morris Collier, wrote in the Gospel Coalition recently, while the renewed interest in the transcendent, there's that word, at Oxford certainly includes the vast swathe of undergrads inspired by TikTok spirituality, well, not in America for a few days ago, or those walking with crystals around their necks and tarot cards in their pockets, there's a noteworthy turn towards organised religion as well. Look up Witch Talk. Don't follow it, but look it up on TikTok. Interesting. But she's noticed that people are actually interested again in the religion that birthed the place, Oxford, that people had rejected as old and stuffy, and suddenly old and stuffy doesn't look so bad. Old and stuffy looks like it might be ancient and historically based and older than you and have something to say. And people are going to explore it again. What does she say? Well, when chatting about my faith at the pub, now a Northern Irish person would not say that's possible back in, pagan, I've encountered the same response several times. You know what, they say? I'm actually a bit jealous. I'm actually a bit jealous. I told you the story of my running friend who was amazed at Christians. I envy you, Christians, she said. There's something you've got that I don't have. She felt lonely, didn't have community, didn't have a structure to her life. Envy and jealousy towards the church. I don't know if I mentioned it here last week. I've mentioned it before somewhere else, just the Bundaberg rum ad. We did talk about that, did we? I don't know. Those Bundaberg bears look like they're having a good time. The jealousy towards the gospel should be one of our key features. I don't like what you believe, you Christians, but gee, you look like you're having a good time when you're believing it. I feel jealous. And then there was the Asbury revival at Asbury College in the United States, so-called, where for weeks students gathered at the chapel at Asbury and prayed. And all these bigwigs wanted to come down and see who it was, big preacher people wanted to come down and no, we don't need that. And people said, well, maybe it was a work of God, maybe it wasn't a work of God. But J.T. Reeves was a student there, postgraduate student. And here's what he said about why he ended up there. Imagine that, like me, you grew up in a hurricane blitz of secularism that systematically dismantled your belief in the unseen. Even if a miracle should happen, you'd probably be too sensible or cynical to believe it. Before you hit puberty, rampant individualism forcefully placed you in a cage like a circus animal and handed you an iPhone so you could pretend you're not lonely. You use the phone, and sometimes it works. That does feel a little bit bracing, doesn't it? So there was a need for something transcendent in people's lives. And that's part of what we think when we come here to church. We're not just saying our job when we sing songs is to encourage each other. That's true. But also there is something going on vertically. And it's very easy for Christians to say, I want to show you how sensible my church is by just doing it's just this way. When people actually want you to weird it up a little bit. It can't be any weirder than what most other people believe if they're on Witch Talk and carrying tarot cards around with them at Oxford University. How weird can you be? And for a long time we thought, well, we've got the weird bit about the resurrection, but we'll show how sensible the resurrection is. And then the rest of the weird stuff we don't want anything to do with. And I don't think that's very compelling to a world which is weirding us out. It's what weird are we involved in? I say that carefully. And there's my Bundy bear, just in case you forgot. Look at that. Ross Douthat, who writes for the New York Times, asks this question. Does the future belong to the secular progressivism of an ageing West, the supernaturalist Christianity of a youthful Africa, or to the collision of both with some sort of emergent post-Christian spirituality, the rise of techno-religion, or the return of pagan magic? What do you reckon? Probably a bit of everything. The flotsam and jetsam of a tsunami, where people have no meaning and purpose and don't know where they could turn for it, and if anything offers it to them, they will take it. Douthat goes on to say, it's one thing to get non-believers to offer kind words for cultural Christianity or endorse the sociological utility of church-going. People who go to church, by the way, and actually the stats show they're happier, their marriages are longer and better, they give more, they serve more in their communities, etc., etc. All the stats show that. But he's saying it's the pragmatics of it isn't enough. The challenge is to go further, to persuade anxious moderns that religion is more than merely pragmatically useful. Like Elon Musk's wife who said she's exploring Christianity in order to help her stop vaping. And Charles Spurgeon, who smoked big cigars, would be horrified by that. Keep vaping, lady, you know. More than just a wistful hope, that a religious framework actually makes much more sense of reality than the allegedly hard-headed materialist alternative. He parks the four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse there and says, they've failed. For all the books and all the lectures and all the writings, they've failed. Two of them have fallen off the horse, by the way, anyway, so there are two left, but they've failed. No one's going around saying there's probably no God, so let's just be happy. Because they're not. And Douthat says this as he finishes. Something more than argument is required to pull them through. And what he's saying is, we don't just need the equal and opposite four horsemen of the atheist apocalypse over this side to argue your case. We need something that's compelling to move people to it. Augustine said our problem is our disordered loves. We worship. We want to give our allegiance to something. And Matthew Arnold says all you've got left is each other, and we say no, all you've got left is ourselves, and we want something bigger than that. I want people to be moved by what we're saying. Our sermons in our churches are not to be like the moon, clear, bright and cold. That it'll be like the sun, warm and enlivening. How are we tracking on those things in our evangelical churches around the West? It's a question we have to ask. Something more than argument. What is that something more than argument? It has to be something that compels people that even though they go, if I do that, I'm going to have to give that up. And an argument won't make you give it up. I've pastored enough people and tried to disciple them away from really bad sins that they really, really like. And arguments don't tend to do it. They've got to be drawn by something that's greater. That's the key. The great sermon, Samuel Rutherford. The expulsive power of a new affection. Something has to replace the love for that. More than argument. It has to be something that compels them. They've got to come here and go, gee, they're a great bunch of arguers. No. There's something about the way they love. Something about the way they don't hold grudge. Something about the way they hold lightly to stuff. Something about the way the person on the edge who's not impressive is part of their core, celebrated on their stage. That's compelling. That would make you envious and jealous. I hope we're thinking about those things in the way we live our lives. I'll write this. There's sure to be plenty about the future that we will recognise, although many challenges will be more complex than we had imagined. But when it comes to the future, that's all we have, our imaginations. There will be patterns that are familiar and problems that we did not envisage. We will be blindsided both by trends that we could have predicted and by cataclysmic events that will only have seemed obvious on the other side of them. Welcome to history. That's how it's always been. And you can see why people in our world, without a big picture understanding of anything, are so fraught. You can see why they feel it is a cosmic roller coaster of where they're going. This is Rembrandt's painting of Daniel's, second half of Daniel. You read the first half of Daniel, it's a cracker, isn't it? It's a cracker read. You think this is great, and then what has he been smoking by the time of chapter 7, right? It's like, what? It just switches to beasts and heads and horns, and you get this. And what it is, really, it's just, there's history from ground level, and God breaks in chapters 1 to 6, but what Daniel gets in chapters 7 to 12 is history from above. He sees the sweep. God gives him a vision. Doesn't explain everything, but he says, this is what it looks like. You see those animals coming up out of the churning sea? Those are the kingdoms, and the churning sea is the sweep of history and where it's going, and it looks like a tsunami. It looks bad. And if you didn't have a big picture view of it, you'd be in despair. And Daniel's given this. He's given a big picture of God in control, which allows him to go on living his life. And if you read the book of Daniel, you'll realise he's taken into exile by Babylon's king, Nebuchadnezzar. But it says at the end of chapter 6, after the story bit of the, he continued till the reign of King Cyrus, who was the king who sent the exiles back to Jerusalem from Babylon. His life spans the tumult of history because God's in control. God's in control. Daniel's future-proofed, not by his insight, not by his status or position, not even by his Jewish pedigree. Daniel is future-proofed by the God who knows the future and who holds it in his hands. And this year's word is vibe and transcendence, but who knows what next year's word's going to be. just the way it is. And is it a sea of faith coming back in an orderly way that we can feel like the 1950s way of doing church is coming back? Or will it just upend us with a flotsam and jetsam of a tsunami as people flood to our doors and say, what have you got? We need something. And you got... Because you always pray for converts in church, but if 400 turned up on Sunday, you would, oh Lord, that's not quite what I must have put an extra zero on the end of that, sorry. But what would happen if that tsunami landed on your church on Sunday? Would you be spiritually ready for it? Would you be relationally ready for it? Would you be economically ready for it? Those are all questions that we have to ask going into the future. Well, I've hit nearly half past. Thanks so much for listening. This felt like a bit of a... It could go here, it could go there, but in the end, that's how I actually feel. Who knows? But Daniel saw the vision of God in charge of all of history. And at the end of the book, it says, go your way, Daniel. You know, you're not going to know everything. You will sleep, and then you'll rise, and the world will keep going. And in the end, there'll be a resurrection, some to judgment and shame, some to eternal life. And that's the big picture. That's all he gets. I'd like to know more, but that's what he gets. How about we leave it there and we'll have some questions.